I came back to Olaf while he gathered his ships in the pool below London Bridge, and I found him ill at ease and angry with Ethelred and Edmund, and when I told him all, most angry with Streon. Now you must stay with me, cousin, for that man will have you slain if he can. There is no doubt that he works for naught. And this word of his about a bribe for me is not his own invention, he has been told to make it. Then he told me of the vast host that had poured into Kent. It was the greatest host that had ever landed on English shores, greater even than had been ours when we Angles left our old home a desert, and came over to this new land and took it. Olaf and the Kentish levies had fought and had been driven back, and now day by day we looked to see Knut's armies before London, and also for the coming of Edmund with his men. But neither came, for the Mercian levies would not fight unless the king himself headed them, and Knut passed through Surrey into Wessex and none could withstand him. Aye, they fought him. Wessex is covered with nameless battlefields, but ere long half of Knut's fleet was sent round to the Severn, and Ethelred, sick and despairing, came back to London with but a few men. It angers me even to think of what befell after that. Edmund and Streon gathered each a good force, and came together within touch of Knut. And then on the eve of battle, Edric made known his plan to his Mercian thanes, and that was nothing more nor less than that they should go over bodily to Knut when the fight began. Which treachery so wrought on the honest Mercians that they would fight not at all, and so disbanded in sight of the enemy, leaving Edmund with but enough men to make good his retreat. And Knut was master of all the land from Kent to Severn shores, Ethelred's own country. So Edric Streon went over to Knut, and with him many thanes who despaired of help from Ethelred, and chose rather peace under a king who was strong enough to give it them. And one night 40 of the English ships slipped away from us down the tide and joined the Danes at Sandwich. The men had been bribed by Streon, as we found. Almost then did Olaf make up his mind to leave England, but he pitied Ethelred, who turned to him again in this new trouble, and he did not go. But my men will not bide patiently much longer, he told me. Here is neither honor nor gold to be won, and I need them for my going to Norway when the time comes. For every day Olaf looked for some sign that should bid him go back and take his own land from Knut's hand. Now Ethelred would not stir from London, fearing treachery everywhere. And again Edmund's levies melted away for want of their king's presence, and at last we persuaded him to meet Edmund at Coventry, and I went with him. There was a good levy that would have followed him, but some breath of suspicion came over him, and suddenly he left them and fled back to London and the citizens, whom he trusted alone of all England. And he would not suffer me to bide with Edmund, but I must go back with him. So the levies melted, and Edmund went north to Earl Eutard of Northumbria for help. Then when the winter wore away, and April came in calm and bright, the most awesome thing befell England that had been yet. For in the north Edmund and Eutard marched across the country, laying waste all as they went, lest the north should rise for Knut, and going east as they went west, Knut ravaged and burnt all the southern Midlands. Then rose the wail of all England, for friend and foe alike had turned on her, and her case was at its hardest. And from that time forwards I know that none who chose Knut for king should be blamed. Then Knut fell on York, and Eutard of Northumbria, whose wife was Danish, submitted to him, and was slain by Streon's advice, as men say, though some say that he was slain by Thorkel the Jarl when he took the ships that tried to escape from the Humber. It may be thus. The shipmen fought well, and were all slain 60 ships' crews. Now all England was open to Knut, and Eirik the Jarl fell on Norwich and drove Ulfketel back on us, and from him we heard of this trouble. On the eve of St. George's Day, Ethelred sent for me to his chamber, for he would speak with me. I found him sitting in a great chair before the fire, wrapped in furs, though the day was warm and sunny, and he was very feeble, so that his thin hands had little strength in them. The Queen, Emma, was with him, looking young and handsome as ever, and in the light of a narrow window sat Edward the Atheling, the sunshine falling on his strange white hair and on the pages of a great book over which he pored. He just lifted his pale eyes from his reading as I went in and saw who it was, and smiled pleasantly at me, and then turned to his book again. I thought that the troubles of the time passed lightly on the proud lady and the boy, whose learning was all that she cared for. "Come near, Redwald, my son," the king said, in his voice that had grown so faint of late. "I have a charge to lay on you." I went and knelt by him, and he put his hand on my shoulder, and the tears came to my eyes at the kindly touch, for it was the same as, and yet so unlike, that which had been a promise of friendship to me at the first time that I saw him. "All things are slipping from me, Redwald," the king said, "nor is there aught that I grieve to lay down when the day comes on which I must pass through the gate of death. Crown and scepter have been heavy burdens to me, for with them has been the weight of the sword also. I have borne those ill, and used that cruelly. I am the unready, but I have listened to ill counsels, having none of my own, nor wit to see what was best." He ceased for faintness, and my heart ached to hear him speak thus to me, his servant. But Emma the queen turned half away from him, her face growing hard and scornful as she heard. Then Edward set his book down gently, and, looking sadly at his mother, came and stood over against me at the other side of the king, and took his one hand and said, "There are laws which you have made, my father, which will live in the hearts of men alongside those that Edgar made our best. There will not be all blame to you in the days to come, when men see clearly how things have gone with you." Thereat Ethelred smiled faintly, and he answered, "I pray that it may be so. But the good outweighs not the evil. I may not count the one, I must confess the other." He passed into thought, looking into the fire, and we were still beside him. The queen moved away to the seat where Edward had been sitting and took his place, staring out of the window with unseeing eyes. And I was glad that she was no longer beside us. Presently the king raised his head and turned it a little towards me. "Redwald," he said, "you were our companion in Normandy, and you are a trusted friend of ours. It will not be long before the queen must fly to her brother the good duke again, and it is in my mind that her flight will be perilous. When that time comes, let it be your place to see her safely thither, with the athelings, her sons. It may be that Olaf will help you, but that you must see to as best you can. And I have sent for Abbot Elfric to help you." "Lord King," I said, "what I can I will do, but I think there are men better fitted than I to guard our queen." "None whom we trust more fully," the king said. "See, my queen, this is he to whom you must look for furtherance of your journey." Then Emma turned from the window, and her face was still unmoved. "I can trust Redwald," she said. "It will be well." But Edward wept openly, for he knew that the king spoke of the day when he should die. "That is well," the king said, and leaned back on his pillows. "Now have I no care left. Yet it is hard to put so heavy a burden on your young shoulders, my Thane." "It is an honor rather," I answered. "May I be worthy thereof." Then a brightness came over the king's face, and he answered me slowly and plainly, and with great joy, as it were. "Presently I shall meet with Edmund, your martyred king, and to him I will say that his Thane of Bears is worthy. Forget me not also, my father, when you come to that place," Edward said. "I will not forget. Now is given me to see plainly what shall be in the time to come to what all tends even now. For now in the time of my death comes to me rede unearthly, as I think. There must be a strong hand who shall weld England into one, who shall bid our land forget that difference has ever been betwixt Anglo and Saxon, Jute and Northumbrian, Mercian and Wessexman, Saxon and English and Dane. And when that wonder is wrought, then shall come peace and a new life to the land, under one who will give them the laws that they need to bind them into one English race, strong and honest, and patient in all things." Then said Edward, as the king ceased, "That is what those who love England would most hope for." But his voice was hushed, as in the presence of one who sees beyond this earth. Thereat the king looked on him, and said, "Have patience, my son, and you shall see it, and you shall have part and share therein." After that he spoke no more, and for a time we waited beside him. Soon he seemed to sleep, and I rose at a sign from the queen and left his chamber. Nor did I ever see Ethelred our king alive again. For when the morning came he had laid his heavy burdens down and had passed to the rest that he longed for. And the bells that rang merrily for St. George's Mass ceased, and the toll for the dead went mournfully over the city. Edmund is king, God help him, men said. So it came to pass that even as they buried the king in the great church of St. Paul, the Danish armies were closing round the city, and when I went to Olaf to beg him to advise me concerning the flight of the queen, he answered, "You and I must part, my cousin. For you had better take ship from some quiet port, and that on the southern coast, and so make for Normandy. But I must see the citizens through this siege, and then I will come to you at Rouen, and we will take counsel together again." He would bide no longer in England after this, for the doubt of him that Edmund would not listen to was strong in the minds of others, and his presence was of little use. Only the London folk and Ulfketel loved him, knowing him well, and holding that they owed him much. But none knew better than Earl Ulfketel that Olaf must not bide here longer. Now our scouts kept coming in with news of Nut, and at last I could see by which road to fly with most chance of safety. I would go by Winchester and so to Southampton and there take ship with the Queen. Nut's fleet would be in the Thames ere long, if it barred not the mouth already. But Abbot Elfric had not come. We feared that he had fallen into Danish hands, for it was hard to say where they were not. It seemed that we must perforce leave London without him. Yet I would stay till the last for his coming. Now I must leave England, and I have said little about myself. But when this duty was laid on me by the king, I thought more of my lost quest of Hertha than I had done of late. For now I must leave her in our poor land, where she must be hunted maybe from hiding to biding, place to place, and in my heart grew up an unreasoning anger against Aelwyn and Gunhild, who by their secrecy had kept me from bringing her here with Olaf. Then as I looked over this I became sure that they had seen somewhat in me which their charge could not love, so that they would keep me from her altogether. And I made up my mind to that at last, not wondering that it was so, for I was but a warrior and a landless thane with naught to be proud of but skillful weapon play, and some scars to show that I had been in a fight or two where blows were falling. And I minded how I had told Aelwyn that I held myself free, and thought that he and Gunhild, and maybe Hertha also, would have it so. Yet I cared little for that, having heavier things to fill my mind than thought for a maiden whose very looks I knew not now. At least these two had taken Hertha into their charge, denying me any part therein, and I could not blame them rightly. I had done my best and could no more. Then at the last moment Elfric came. "Glad am I that you have not gone, my son," he said, as I greeted him. "I have wandered many a long mile over crossroads to escape the Danes. Very nearly did they have me once, but I escaped them. That will be a pleasant tale beside Duke Richard's fire, however. When must we go?" "With nightfall, father," I said. "The horses are standing almost ready even now. How many shall you need?" "Myself, and my chaplain, and 3 sisters 5, he said, if you can take so many. These would fly with me and the Queen." I thought for a moment. The Queen had Edward and his brother Alfred and 5 maidens with her, and there were the pack horses and the servants. But 2 of the maidens were unwilling to go, being daughters of London thanes. Our court was very small in these days. So, as every woman added to our company was a source of weakness, in that our pace must be that of the least able to bear fatigue, I doubted until I thought that the Queen might let the sisters take the places of the maidens who cared not to fly with her. I went and asked her this, and she flushed with wounded pride, though I gave her my reasons and urged her peril. How shall it be told that Emma of Normandy was beholden to a nunnery for her handmaidens? She said. It shall not be told, my queen, I said stoutly. Men shall say that you gave protection to the holy women. Truly my wits were sharpened by sore need, for at once the queen agreed to this. She loved power, and even this little use thereof pleased her. When can we go? She asked. I long to see my own land again. At nightfall, in 2 hours' time, I told her. It is well. Be ready then, she said. She had persuaded herself, as I believe, that she arranged all things, and I was glad to have it so, for I had feared that I should have had trouble more than enough with her unreasoning pride. So I told Ælfric that his nuns could go, and he thanked me, laughing a little, with some thought of their journey here as I thought, and he added, Aye, their dress protects them a little. It is not as in the old days of heathen against Christian. There is this to be said for Nut, that he will have no monastery or nunnery harried if his orders are carried out. Then a thought came to me, and I wished that I could persuade our queen to take on herself and her maidens the convent dress. She would not be the first royal lady of England who had worn it. And I asked Ælfric to persuade her to do so, for Emma's great failing was love of queenship. If I know aught of our queen, he said, she wants to ride in state. She does, I answered. I think, father, that we have a troublous journey before us. She will not believe but that she may ride as ever through the land. You plan and I will argue, the good man said, being ever light-hearted. So he went to the queen and spoke long with her, but she would in no wise ride out of London but as a queen, even as she had told me more than once. There was nothing against that, but that word might go to the Danish leaders that she was leaving the city. Still, if we could get her to disguise herself thus when our guards left us, it might be as well. The Danes, did they seek her, would look for a larger party than ours, and would pay no heed to us, perhaps. Now Olaf and my Colchester spearmen would be our guards even to the Surrey hills, for beyond them was not much fear of the Danes, who were advancing from Mercia, northward of the Thames. Only in the towns were garrisons whom we must fear, for they sent out parties to raid the land for provender and plunder and to keep the poor folk from rising on them. So it was my plan, and it seemed good to Ælfric, to travel as a little party only. So could we more easily escape notice, and take the byways, while an armed force, however small, would draw on us the notice of the Danes whose duty it was to watch against any gathering of English warriors. We started that night as soon as dark came on, and the queen was pleased with the guard around her, and that Olaf the king himself rode at her side. Men cheered him as we passed along the streets, and the queen deemed that the cries were for her, and drew herself up proud and disdainful as she sat on her white horse with spearmen before and behind her, and her maidens on either side. But I doubt if any man knew who she was in the dusk. And I had sent the pack horses and servants on before us to wait our coming at a certain place, so that none should be able to say that we were a party of fugitives. Presently the queen waxed silent, and Olaf and I could talk to one another of what we would do in the time to come if this and that happened. I told him that I should certainly return to fight at Edmund's side, for the queen would not keep me in Rouen. When he left London it was his wish to seek me there, and so we looked to see one another again before very long. Then it is farewell, my cousin, he said, when at last we came to Banstead, for he would not leave us sooner. We have had a good fight or two together, and may have more, and to more profit, as I hope, in the days to come. We halted at the monastery and prayed for shelter there for the night, or at least what was left of it, and while Ælfric spoke with the superior of the nuns who were there, I took leave thus of Olaf and of my spearmen. And these prayed me to return soon and lead them again. That I promised them, and so the darkness closed between us as they rode away, and I was left sad at heart enough, for Olaf was as a brother to me, and I knew not when I should meet with him again. There was no talk of Danes at this quiet place over which the wave of war had gone already, leaving it poorer, but in peace, and it was not until the next afternoon that we rode out again, our party being that which must see the long road over together. 12 of us there were. The Queen and her 2 maidens and the 3 nuns, Elfric the abbot and his chaplain, Edward and Alfred the athelings, and Alfred's tutor who was a churchman of Elfric's own monastery, and myself. Then there were the servants, 10 in all, who rode each leading a lightly laden pack-horse. It was such a party as an abbot might well travel with, and that is all that would be said of us if the Danish writers asked aught of the roadside folk. I and Edward alone were armed as the abbot's housecarls. The men bore but spear and seeks, as would any wayfarer for fear of robbers and the like. Now, when all was ready in the courtyard, and we waited for the Queen, she stood on the threshold before I knew her, for the nuns of the place, taught by Elfric, had prayed her to take their dress for the journey, and she had done so, as also had her 2 maidens. They were as abbess and sisters therefore, and I thought that one trouble was over, that is if our Queen would but take the part of a nun as well as the dress, and be guided by Elfric the abbot. Thus our journey to the sea was begun. And of that journey I might tell much, for it was a strange one. I think that the hardest task that a man could have, must be to take a proud and headstrong woman through a country full of danger, when she dislikes the manner of journey. And when that woman is a queen, surely it is harder yet. Had it not been for Elfric and Edward, I know not how we should have fared, for at times Emma the Queen would not speak with me, if some plan that I must needs make was not to her liking. And seeing that she knew not of the meaning of either time or distance, that was often enough. And when I heard of danger that must be skirted, she would tell me that none would dare molest the Queen, that she would declare herself and all would be well. And seeing that of all hostages to nut the Queen would be the most valuable, that plan would be fatal. I will say this now, that more than once I was obliged for very safety's sake to give wayside folk, among whom we were, to understand that the abbess was crazed through the long troubles, believing herself a queen. And, alas for our land! It was but too easy for them to believe it. Few there were who knew not some wretched ones crazed at that time by all that had befallen them. Well, it was for us that the nights were clear and warm, and that the good Surrey and Hampshire franklins' wives were compassionate and hospitable. I could not now retrace our footsteps, for we could go by no road at times, but must take to the woods and downs. And ever when we did so the Queen rode sullenly, and angry with all around her, while Edward and I and the 2 priests, who were valiant men enough, were ahead, scenting danger everywhere, for we had many a narrow escape of meeting raiding Danes. The stragglers of that mighty host were everywhere. I think that had we fallen into such hands I should have tried to send a man in all haste to the nearest post of the Thingmen, that we might be taken again by warriors at least. But the ladies bore the long journey well, and Elfric's nuns the best. I had little to do with them, having so many cares about me, and was glad enough to leave them in the closer charge of the abbot and his priests. But soon I found that there was one of the 3 nuns who was untiring and ever able to hearten the rest, and that even the Queen listened to her. The dress made all 5 of the maidens seem alike at first, but in a few days the pleasant, cheerful face of this one seemed familiar to me, and it was fair enough for all the novice's garb she wore. I thought she minded me of someone whom I knew, and at last, finding out a likeness as I looked for one, I called her in my own mind Sister Sexburga, for surely she was like that fair friend of mine. It never happened that I heard her name, for I was ever forward and away from the Queen's complainings, and the nuns spoke little even to one another. Little rest and much care had I all the way thus. I will not write it, but will go on to the time when we came safely in sight of Winchester town. I could not enter it with my charges, but must needs go by myself, for here I should learn more sure news than anywhere. And what I might learn would decide whether I could take ship in Southampton water or turn eastwards a little and go to Portsmouth or Bosham havens. Now I knew that the Danes held the place in force, and so I told the Queen. But to pass by her royal city seemed more than she could bear, and she wished and commanded us to ride in and call on her citizens to rise and protect her. Queen of England I am and will be, she said. I have borne in dignity long enough. My queen, I said, if you see Winchester you will not see Normandy. Then Elfric spoke with her, and at last she wept, saying that she was deserted, and the like, and so turned sullen, bidding us give her up to the Danes, who would respect a queen in distress. Having seen this manner of submission to counsel not once or twice before, I put on a franklin's dress, and gave Swordfoe's bane into Edward's keeping, and took a hunting spear instead, and went down into the town, leaving my party 10 miles away in a nook of the wooded hills. The scarlet-cloaked Danish thingmen at the gates paid no heed to me, for it was market day, and many countryside people were going in and out. So I went to the marketplace, and sat down on a bench outside an inn with others and listened to all that I could, while I drank my ale and ate as did the rest. Some I talked with. There was little hatred of Nut here, as I found. There was some change, too, in the ways of the thingmen, for it was not their plan here to make themselves hated and feared as in East Anglia. Then came a man whose face and walk were those of a seaman, and he sat down close to me, and I pushed the ale-mug towards him, and we began to talk of his calling. He had come to Winchester to find some merchant who needed a ship, as it seemed, and he began, as a good sailor will, to praise his own vessel with little encouragement. I found out from him that Southampton water was full of Danish vessels, and so I asked where his own lay. In Bosham Haven, he said. Earl Wulfnoth will have no Danes in his land. I must get some safe conduct from the Danish folk here if I come into the water. So being tired of doing naught I even rode up to this place to see if aught could be managed for a voyage. Now I thought that I was in luck's way, for from this man, who seemed honest enough, I could perhaps gain all I wanted. His ship was a great buss, fitted with a cabin fore and aft under the raised decks, and I could wish for no better chance than this might be. Would you take passengers for Normandy instead of goods? I asked him carelessly. Aye, truly, and gladly if they could pay well. Now I will tell you that I am Earl Wulfnoth's friend, I said, and you may know that pay is safe, therefore. I was at Pevensey when Olaf the Thick, the Viking, came there. He took my word for my friendship with the Earl, and then I arranged for all things to be ready for us in a week's time. We had some rough country to cross before we came to Bosham, and I would not hurry over it. We wrangled over the price a little, as was fitting, for I would not seem too eager, but at last he said that he would depart on the morrow, and we shook hands and were satisfied. Speak not of this matter, friend Berkrick, I said, or we may be waylaid by Danes off the haven's mouth. Little fear of that, master, he laughed. Our young Earl Godwine has beaten 1 or 2 ships already. Then I went back light-hearted to my people, and when the Queen heard what I had done her mood changed, and she was most gracious, and thanked me, saying that she feared that I had run into danger for her in going into the town. So I felt myself repaid in full for the little trouble, that had been without risk as it fell out. Very fair was the great Andred's Weald in the late April weather, but the forest tracks were rough and the way seemed long. Once we beat off, easily enough, some cowardly outlaws, but there were no Danes in Andred's Weald, and we came to Bosham in safety. There Bertrick's good ship was ready for us, and it happened that no other vessels, save fishing craft, were in the haven. I had looked to meet Godwine, my friend, but he and his ships were in Dorchester water, and there were few to mark our coming into the quiet town, or our going on board, which we did without delay. We had no need of the stout housecarls, who had led the horses and served us so well, so the Queen, as I asked her, gave them the horses as gifts in recompense for their journey, and so when they had gone we were few indeed. But there was room for few passengers in the bus. The Queen and her ladies had the larger after cabin, and Elfric and the athelinks and the 2 priests had that under the foredeck. I would remain on deck with Berkrick and his crew of 20 men, but there was no hardship in that. That night on Bertric's ship was the first for 3 long weeks that had sound sleep for me, for they hauled out into the middle of the haven, and none could come near us unseen, and I was at last free from care and watching. But one thing troubled honest Bertric, and that was that he had found a black kitten on board. None knew whence it came, and he said it was an ill sign. And he dared do not but treat it well, since it had come.